Hi everyone, I'm Olivier. I'm CTO at Thing Zero and advising on IoT stuff for some time now.
I'm Ryan Kershaw, director here at Thing Zero as well, and work on the industrial side of things.
Awesome. I'm Jake Hall, the Manufacturing Millennial. I'm a industry advocate to talk about the industry to get people excited about what new technology and really automation is transforming the industry.
So Jake, when we think about manufacturing, we think about old bearded guys. I'm the only
Yeah.
one without beard here, but the fact that you call yourself the manufacturing millennial and still pass for the OG in the room, that makes me feel super old, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's the tagline's been around for a while, but the problems that our industry is facing is still the same. We're still struggling with getting that next generation excited. Now it might not be the millennial generation anymore. That's the young ones. It's now the Gen Alphas and the Gen Zs that my kids are going to be going to.
So you're gonna start working with your kids then to come up with the name for the next generation of podcasts, like
Yeah,
like an alpha or the zanies and Gen Z or something like that.
they don't have a tagline yet, but they are programming robots right now. So at 7 years old, they're already in the field.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice. I didn't manage to get my kids to be interested in IoT and tech. They're doing architecture and sports and like all different things. No, like
Hey, speaking of sports, the one time you and I actually met in person, you forced me to wear your Chicago Cubs hat, so you'd wear the litmus hat, the company I was supporting at that point. And it was just brought me down. Having to put on a Cubs hat as a Jays fan, not great. But I gotta say, they're doing really well this.
Cubs are doing good right now. Well, we're a few games behind the Brewers going into to win the conference, but there's a good chance. Right now, we're like 6.5 games up in the wild card, so I think we'll definitely be at the playoffs this year.
You're looking good. Maybe your Cubs, my Jays World Series this year, and we can start talking crap over LinkedIn. For
Probably not, but
hey, man, it's good. Yeah. So hey, listen, we do want to bring you on just to talk sports and that, but you're a great advocate in the industry. I think we're trying to talk a little bit what's happening behind the scenes at many of these, many of the things that are going on. Really wanted to get your opinion on some of the hot takes that are happening today. I know that you're a big advocate of education, of looking at manufacturing in the U.S. Talk to us a little bit about what you see with manufacturing in the U.S., especially the reshoring movement with tariffs and that. Do you see the guys here having the infrastructure, having the willingness to bring manufacturing back to where it was, or what's going to happen there?
well, I think it's one of those things to look at where you know when you look at tariffs, without getting on the political discussion of it. The one thing about tariffs is if you're trying to drive manufacturing jobs back to the US, we need to understand that it's not one of those things where you create a demand and all of a sudden all the resources are available, right? Right now in manufacturing, there's 600,000 open jobs. I think last month in the industry. If all of a sudden we're creating more demand for companies to invest in the area, but we still don't have an industry of workers available and ready to work into it, we're going to face just more of the issues that we're facing right now. And a lot of times, when you look at manufacturers, 98.6% of manufacturers in the United States are classified as a small to medium sized business. A majority of those companies are not really running in a modern manufactured, um, era of technology that's running on the floor. A lot of these manufacturers are second generation, third generation companies that have been passed down from their parents, and they really haven't changed the way that they integrate and they run. Now, granted, there's a difference between brownfield and greenfield. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure. But I think what we're facing is a lot of these manufacturers are still running as if they were running 20 years ago. So it's hard for companies to adopt new technology that's going to drive efficiency, that's going to drive productivity. If they don't have, first of all, the skill sets to do so, if they don't have the demand from the leadership to make that happen, um, and if at the same time you don't see companies who see the value in the invest in long-term investments. If you have owners of all these small to medium-sized companies who want to go out and they want to sell in the next 5 to 10 years. They're not going to go out there and invest a ton of money into new technologies, new infrastructure, and they're not going to see the ROI on that until probably after they sold. So, there's a lot of um, other things that need to happen when it comes to tariffs to really see the benefit and the largest benefit. We are seeing benefits, but see the biggest return on investment from the tariffs that are happening, unless we put other things in place as well.
But is it one of the reactions I have when we talk about this very topic is these people who've been in business for 20, 30, 40 years, they've been in business for 20, 30 years, right? So it's been working for them, good enough.
Yeah.
And so what's the incentive for them to do things differently? They actually might get even more business without having to do anything, without modernizing, because naturally they will get more people asking them to produce. But I don't see a lot of incentives here to move forward and adopt technology that will let them grow because, good is good enough.
Yeah. It not necessarily though. It's one of those things where, here in West Michigan, which is a big manufacturing place, the announcement came out last week where a manufacturer who's been around for, I think, 30 or 40 years in West Michigan is shutting their doors. NPR of America, they're a pistons ring manufacturing company. And I remember calling on them 10 years ago, back when I was at industrial control at an automation distributor, looking at automating and putting in robots to modernize some of the processes that they were out there. The leadership at the time was not willing to invest in robots for machine tending because of the cost. And that was probably 2017, 2018. And then 8 years later, they're shutting down that building that I think employs 84 people, small to medium-sized business, not big, but I can speak firsthand. They weren't willing to invest. Now, maybe they did 4 or 5 years ago after I was out of that picture, but I remember having discussions with that leadership team a decade ago. And they weren't willing to invest in the automation, the infrastructure to do a lot of that stuff, to go out there and put in vision systems for quality inspections, to look at the quality inspection of these piston rings that they were manufacturing. It's one of those things. I think it just goes back to, like you mentioned, some companies might grow in business, but I think at the same time, though, we look at this industry as a moving train. And as AI and automation and new technology continues to make this industry more digital, more technical, the companies who don't get on the train early enough, when that train's been moving faster and it's left the station, are not going to be able to catch up. There's going to be too much momentum. That train's going to be going too fast. And there's more risk for your company, right? If you're trying to hop on that train, there's a lot more risk for you to hop on that train when it's going 15, 20 miles an hour versus if it was sitting in the station when you could have gotten on earlier, you might have had to wait for a little bit for that train to leave, for that technology to be ready, but at least you were there. So when that train started moving, you're on it.
True.
You had to see. And so I think that's the big thing. Yeah, there's going to be circumstances and cases for everyone, but at the same time, I will say if companies don't de-risk what their processes look like on the manufacturing floor, either through technology, through culture, through workforce attraction, to get a new generation excited about it, to get a generation that's not afraid of technology, they're going to be facing risks either short term or long.
So you mentioned 2017. I mean, there was that little thing in 2020 that kind of happened that threw things off a little bit.
Yeah.
Going forward, do you think that what's happening with trade and everything like this is starting to push more companies to accept automation? And you mentioned like, hey, why bother investing in automation? You might not see an ROI until after you sell. Do you think maybe some companies are starting to, some investment companies are starting to value that a little bit more, walk into a place and say, hey, these guys have actually set us up for success rather than like, crap, we got to tear it out and start again?
I think so. The one thing about when I hear and talk to most companies who adopted automation before the pandemic, they came out significantly stronger than those that did not, because they were able to scale. They were able to drive more flexibility. on their floor when it came to the products that they manufactured, the time they manufactured, the changes in those components. When you successfully implement automation and technology in a way that allows you to drive scalability and flexibility, you're gonna win long term. Um, I think what we will see more companies exploring what automation can do for them. And a lot of it has to do with, I think, technology these days is a lot more easier to implement, right? You can go out there, you don't have to go out and buy a capital expense end of line palletizer to do palletization on the end of line. You can go out and rent one. You can go out and work with a company that does RaaS now and rent a end of line palletizing unit without having to do a significant capital investment up front. Software these days, I think, is becoming a lot easier for companies to grow and scale than what a bunch of big players were at the one point in time. These smaller companies are able to go in and create more specific solutions that are more cost effective to companies. And we're going to see that. I think at the same time as well is this new generation of millennials and Gen Zs that's coming up in the industry is a lot more willing to try technology than what an older generation was to do. You look at the basics of what it took like to integrate a machine vision solution or some code or a robot 20 years ago. You needed to have an engineer on your team to be able to deploy that stuff. Now you just need someone who has got, some basic problem solving skills and is willing to watch YouTube and maybe hop on a GitHub or a Discord forum, or, it's one of those things where the way we implement technology now and get access to learning is developing in a way on how our generations are now learning, right? If we want to learn on something, we don't open up an encyclopedia. We hop on Wikipedia now. We go watch a YouTube video. It's the access to information to be able to problem solve now is completely different. And companies who are willing to go out and do that, we'll see that change.
Yeah. And you think, well, you mentioned that it's definitely a generational thing, because once the decision makers are the young ones, or today young ones that are familiar with technology, and propose to switch to more advanced solutions, machines, equipment, they won't think twice about it. They will just say,
Yeah.
yeah, of course, my thing doesn't have a touch screen, doesn't have a connectivity. What do you mean? No, actually, they have to go there. Now, how do you see, existing infrastructure evolving? Because, we have equipment is like set for the next 20, 30 years, right?
Yeah.
And so you don't change this kind of equipment overnight, just under the pretext that they are outdated or whatnot, right? So do you think there is a intermediary step where they can start collecting some data and making some decisions based on insights they can collect from this, what we call brownfield infrastructure? And is this a mandatory step, in the evolution of their businesses?
Yeah, I think so. I look at it as, I think more companies are learning from what lighthouse facilities are doing that have fully deployed and implemented, smart manufacturing and complete modern infrastructure on the floor. Um, I think what we're seeing most from companies right now is more collaboration in the industry on learning what other companies have tried and what they were successful or not successful doing. I want to say more than ever before, companies, manufacturers who are either competitors or non-competitors, um, they communicate to each other. They talk to each other now, and they're able to learn from each other. I think the industry is a lot more engaging. And so when you're going out there and you want to implement, as you mentioned, a solution or a piece of technology on the floor, um, it's a lot easier to do so. And I think as well is, um, as a new culture of leadership steps in, I think the idea of, if you fail quickly and fail fast rather than drawing out projects. I've seen too many companies try and just, you know, invest in a dead project for too long because they're willing to, not accept failure. I think companies today are much more likely to say, you know what, that didn't work. Let's go try something else out, give it a shot again. And I think that's
To be fair, the investments were huge, right?
yeah,
You were saying that today it's easier. Technology is here, software is better, integration is better. But a few years back, these proof of concepts or trial projects were very expensive, and they
yeah,
would take several years sometimes, right? So the risk was pretty high in even trying something new.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So do you think, I mean, we always look at like, we always see the guys that are already in there, they're trying to improve, they do well, but then some new guy comes in the industry, just knocks them back. We've seen this with a few companies, right? Do you think the guys that are in there are established, are they going to get knocked back, or do you think that they're going to be able to adapt fast enough to keep other competitors off? It's the brownfield versus the greenfield debate. Can you improve, or do you just start from scratch?
Yes. I mean, it really varies on culture. It really varies on culture because it's one of those things where, I can have company A and company B do the exact same things, but and they're both brownfield manufacturers. And the way one company is willing to adopt a change compared to the other one is different. Um, I think the big thing that we're looking for is, um, how do I say this? When we look at what manufacturing sees from a greenfield versus brownfield perspective, we're seeing a lot of news all the time. Um, Another guy on LinkedIn, Robert Little, he's always posting great articles on what companies are investing in infrastructure. Hey, Siemens is putting in $10 billion. Some other companies coming in investing in new buildings. It's great to see all of these new investments. But the thing at the end of the day is, will you have the right skill sets with the right people to then run that technology? And it's one of those things is, as this industry grows, we're going to be growing and integrating with new technology. Will the available workforce of skilled people still be there, regardless if you're in brownfield or greenfield? Will that trained workforce be there? And I think at the end of the day, that's the biggest question that we have to offer. Um, we have to ask. When we look at industrial robots, for example, the cost of an industrial robot 25 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, was probably 10x if what it costs today, right? A 7 kg or 20 kg or 40 kg robot today can cost between $30 to $50,000. Go back 30 years ago, and that robot was $150,000.
Yeah, and was not as efficient and as precise and
Absolutely. So when you look at the cost of robots, when the cost of robot gets cut in half, why has the cost of well, why has the amount of industrial robots not doubled? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Why are we not seeing a scale? And I think at the end of the day, it's one of those things is it's not we're no longer trying to find a cost justification for parts and products need to be cheaper. It's, do we have the right people in place to integrate those projects? Because I think at the end of the day, if you had the right skilled people, regardless of if it's machine vision, motion control, PLCs, industrial robots, digital software, if you had better trained people coming out of, high school and college who understood these skill sets up front, you would be able to implement technology at a lot lower cost and a lot more specific at a lot lower risk.
Yep.
I'm not saying, we should just train everyone so we don't need integrators anymore. But at the same time, man, if you're a manufacturer who had skilled people on your team, you would be integrating and deploying technology at a rate far, far greater than the average of the industry, who still relies on third-party people to deploy everything for you. And at the end of the day, it goes back to technology is great, but people's better. And we need more people with the right skill sets and assets, because at the end of the day, technology is becoming easier to deploy. And I think eventually we're going to find, I guess, more of that as people's skill sets come up and technology, is easier, where we are going to find that cross point where it makes sense across the industry. but we're still a long ways out from that, from every level of technology in the manufacturing space.
Yeah. Been the point. I mean, the point about like, oh, robots are going to replace everybody. But I mean, I've seen it from you a bunch of times. Like, robots don't kill jobs; they create them, right?
Yeah, yeah. At the end of the day, robots are creating more jobs for smaller manufacturers and local communities that are keeping them in business in a global economy that the competition's everywhere.
Yeah.
And I'll give you an example of that, right? We talked about earlier how a company went out of business because they didn't adopt technology. Here's another great example where, there's a company down in Middleville, which is about 35 minutes southeast of where I live in West Michigan. They went out there and they put in new pick and place and machine tending equipment, their machine shop for their 5-axis equipment, for their 5-axis CNC machines. And by doing so and putting in all those new robots, they were able to keep business that was being bidded against overseas for parts and components that were much cheaper than what they were originally producing. But when they were able to go out there and implement and integrate those into there, they were able to keep that business, which kept that 20 to 25 person machine shop going, because those parts didn't go overseas. At the end of the day, those robots kept jobs, those robots saved jobs, and those robots that, at the result of it, created higher technical, higher paying jobs for people who worked out there.
Yep. Yeah, actually, that's interesting because there's the same discussion in other industries with AI, right? AI or generative AI bringing new set of tools that will force everyone to be more skilled in technology to do their work on a day-to-day basis, right? A technical writer was good at its technical domain in writing. Nowadays, a technical writer has to be good at prompting an AI for generating the content, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a parallel here with the physical, automation robots and physical human versus the human brain versus generative AI.
Yeah. AI is not going to take people's jobs. People who use AI are going to take people's jobs who don't use AI.
Yeah. Definitely.
It's at the end of the day. If you are a landscaping business and you are out there using a push mower, the person who is out there using a zero turn, 44-inch, 60-inch wide bladed ride-on lawnmower is going to be cheaper than you because they could do it faster and they could do more. It's one of those things is adopt the technology that's available, invest in it. Don't complain about, oh, this is the way I used to do it, so why can't I keep doing it? That's such a bad way of thinking about how to stay relevant in a changing industry.
Yeah. And do you see AI, especially generative AI, because AI in general, right? When I think about machine learning applied to algorithm for vision AI, for anomaly detection and so on is one thing, right? So it's technology that comes along with automation basically, or enhances existing equipment. But then there's generative AI that has different, way of working. But generative AI can be used in the industry for training people. They can be used also for people to interact or interface with their equipment. Do you see that as being something that is welcome, or does this feared, that is not understood in the industry?
I think it's one of those things. There was fear originally, but I think it's one of those things is, as it becomes more part of people's daily lives, there's people who are afraid of what they don't understand and what they don't know.
Yeah.
You look at 3D printing right now. For a long time, additive manufacturing was one of those things that manufacturers didn't want to touch because they thought it was just this play toy. Well, when people got more educated and understanding what the materials look like, what the process looks like, what the capabilities of it are, additive manufacturing is just another type of manufacturing process that's out there, just like subtractive manufacturing, with different materials, with different structures, with different capabilities. It's just another tool that's out there. And I think that's the same thing that we're going to see with AI. There's a lot of people, listen, at the end of the day, the general media, general society, people listen more to fear than they do excitement in a lot of areas, right? That's why everything on the media these days is always about negativity and fear, rather than excitement and happiness, right? And people, and the reason why the media does that is because people will pay attention more to rationalizing on fear than excitement. So the same thing with AI. Everyone's saying AI this, negative, 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 because they want people to go out there and fear, to want to know what's happening, to continue to click back on the page. What's changed, rather than going out there and trying yourself, informing yourself of what could happen and learning on your own. That's the way things will happen. So at the end of the day, if companies are willing, like I said earlier, if companies and leadership is willing to go out and experiment and take risks on their own, they're going to find out they're going to be in a much better position than companies out there who are just making decisions off of what other people are telling them is the correct technology and resource to use.
Yeah. Well, I still hope people will listen to us, things you're right, because we're trying to tell them how to do it, right? So, and actually, that leads me, maybe Ryan, you have another question, but I wanted to bring the conversation to the security and trust aspect of things, right? There's trust in technology, in the sense of like, hey, do you trust AI to do a good job? But then there's also, we are proposing to open up closed infrastructures, things that were usually, like, even with Industry 3.0, like automated, but working on a closed network, something that was not touched from the outside. And we're proposing with Industry 4.0 to bring all that data to a cloud or to an infrastructure where you can analyze all that data at scale and then make decisions, and then, do more automation, do more enhancements on your business models, and so on. Security comes into play. Network is not connected to the internet potentially, or to a public cloud or something like that. And now you're starting to share data that could be, problematic if you're being hacked, if the data is stolen, things like that. So security is something that is, in my view, key to establish the trust for technology to be deployed. Do you see the same thing? Do you see security as a main concern or not?
I think security is not as big of a concern as it should be from companies. I think it's one of those things where, right, we as we bring more equipment, more infrastructure to a connected platform, we need to make sure we're doing it the right way. That we're setting up demilitarization zones, that we're creating the correct infrastructure to make it happen. At the end of the day, I really truly believe that there will always be more positive opportunities than the negative aspects of what, a security, having security issues could happen. I think it's one of those things it goes back to kind of what I mentioned earlier. Going out there and trying things, learning, having discussions, and learning from what people are doing is the best approach for that. And I think for security as well, it's companies are making it so much easier to be able to implement things and have these processes in place where you're no longer on an island by yourself. There's so many resources available when it comes to modernizing existing infrastructure and doing it in a way that's secure. It's a lot harder to mess up than what it used to be. And that's why, when I always talk to companies and saying, if your mentality and mindset on what you should be doing on the manufacturing floor is from something that you learned from 5 or 10 years ago, you really need to go out there and explore again and see what's new, because the industry is growing so quickly. What you thought on the floor was not a large enough ROI justification, or there wasn't the tools and technology that could solve that problem. It's incredible to see what companies can do now in just a short, change in time.
You talked a little bit earlier about, now we see leaders coming into place. They're not sort of the older gen. They're starting to come around, and this whole thing of like, hey, new technology is gonna be great. Security, I kind of see, is still in the old, thinking phase. Like, I had a class last week, and one of the students popped his hand up, and he's like, I was talking, hey, this is all the cool stuff you guys can do, and he's like, yeah, there's no way we're doing that. Like, our security guys are like, nope, Data does not leave this facility. It's not happening. So do you think we're going to see that same sort of change on the security side as what we saw on the technology side?
I think it's one of those things where, just with sending data to a cloud down, how secure things can be. It's providers like Google and Microsoft and Amazon are making it so easy for data to be sent up there, processed, stored, analyzed in a secure fashion. It's one of those things where, like I said, we're I don't want to say we're making it dumb proof, but it's one of those things where it's a lot harder to mess up than what it was before. And I really think, and I am not an IT OT expert. I spent time doing that stuff, but that was the engineers that did at the end of the day. I was on the business development side. But at the end of the day, what we learned is we're capable of doing things a lot in a lot easier, more simplified fashion than what existed, a couple years ago.
There's a big, you were saying that there's a big culture shift that needs to happen because 20, 30 years ago, a factory floor could work by just buying equipment, installing the equipment, training their operators to that equipment, and implementing their own process. And then they were autonomous, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nowadays, you need help from outsiders along the way, like from the get-go. The integration, you cannot do that on your own when you're, assembling plastic pieces. You cannot do the software and so on integration, or you have to hire people, but for the duration of 6 months when you're installing the equipment and then they're useless. So you basically have to accept that you're building your business on resources that are external, eventually running it, because then you're going to buy a subscription for maintenance, and then you're going to buy a subscription for cloud services. So you're no longer just fully autonomous. So there's a big culture shift here that needs to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that culture shift is going to happen when a new generation is willing to come in and try things. It's one of those things where I want to say, hey, wait until the old people retire, but at the same time, in many ways, wait until the older people retire and you'll see change.
Well, you're saying boomers are out now. Gen Xers like me, we were the next ones. Damn it!
When you look at the manufacturing industry right now, the majority of managers and people positioned are actually millennials now in manufacturing.
So you're the next one. You're the next one.
It's changing.
Yeah, I know you do a lot of work on the education side of things. I mean, first robotics is a big one. Even ended up on ESPN because of that one.
So that's pretty cool.
What do you see as like the next thing that schools have to do? And I know we've talked about robots, even all the front end stuff, but there's a lot of digital plumbing that has to be done. How do we create the next generation of digital plumbers?
Yeah, I think the big thing is more schools. And a lot of schools are doing a great job. I'll just use Michigan, for example. There's more high school robotics teams in the state of Michigan than there are football teams in Michigan. Mm-hmm. It's one of those things. There's more high school robotics teams in Michigan than there are football programs. And I think it goes to when you create and you set a foundation of what a community can do to get this next generation excited, a lot of things are possible. Where I went to high school in Granville, Michigan, they have a robotics program there that has, I think, 600 students that are involved in the robotics program starting from like third grade through high school. There's more people in the robotics programs than there are in the athletic programs. At that school. And it's just, it goes the fact is when you create a community of opportunity for people to learn from, things become really capable. And they exist. The other thing with the education side is schools need to look at what resources are available from local manufacturers to bring kids into these manufacturers to see what's happening on the floor. We do that in West Michigan through My Career Quest and Discover Manufacturing, two great organizations that connect the manufacturing companies to the local school districts and high schools and middle schools. With that, about 20,000 kids get to visit and see what happens in manufacturing every single year. And then that's the big thing as well. When there's more collaboration between institutes and education, a lot of really fun things can happen.
Yeah, especially like you talk about the factory business. It's one thing to sit there and learn. It's another to go, poke around somewhere. It's always
Exactly.
cool. Yeah, and you guys were talking a little earlier about kids coming in now and seeing its screen and automatically wanting to touch it. I know when I was working for another company, we had a term called digital natives. These kids are born with iPads in their hands, and that's what they expect. And I know my kids walk up and just trying to push the screen, doesn't matter.
Exactly.
Just wanted to ask you as well, and we talked about what we need to do to get kids interested in these jobs. What do you think these kids are looking for in a career like manufacturing? Like, is it, they're looking for pay, stability, cool stuff to play around with? What do you think's driving them towards that?
I think it's a combination of things. I think one of the big ones is giving them the freedom to learn and to explore. When you look at younger generations, they are independent, self-learning people. And, I think what we look at is when you see kids who are in middle school and high school, my nephew who's in 8th grade, who last year built battle bots and completed in a battle fighting arena, building battle bots, who knows how to code, who has his own who has multiple 3D printers, who can go out there and do all that stuff, right? They are, they're learning. And I think if they see manufacturing as an industry that allows them to play with technology, where they can then use the technology to solve problems and solutions, that's what's going to attract them. Obviously, pay is important, culture is important. But what I think, if industries follow the same practices that this next generation wants a place of impact, it wants a place of problem solving, it wants a place of being able to get access to tools and resources that allow them to learn and not feel like they're trying to solve and not trying to work with technology and products that are 20 years old. That's what's going to bring them in.
Awesome. Awesome. I think that's a good closing word here because we went full circle on the generational thing. I like that you're closing on the education part of things, Jake, because that's something that we don't talk enough about. We talk about training existing engineers or operators, but we don't talk about training the kids. It's cool. I'm gonna have my son looking into studying mechanical engineering, watch this video because that's gonna cheer him up.
Yeah.
And seeing his friends going for computer science, I'm telling him, no, don't do like them. Do your thing because that's gonna work way better for you. I'm sure.
Exactly. Awesome.
Cool.
Great. Well, it was great having you, Jake. And it's nice to have a great voice of yours, out there pushing the next generation. This making manufacturing cool. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, guys.